Welcome back to Luke's Properties YouTube channel. In this video, we're going to walk through the 5-step framework that you need to follow to get your first rent-to-rent deal. We're going to start by talking about how to build a rapport on the viewing. Then we're going to move on to asking questions about the property. Then we're going to speak about finding the landlord or agent's motivation. Then we move on to handling objections. And then finally, how to close the deal. So if you're trying to get your first rent-to-rent deal and you're struggling to get viewings or close any landlords or agents, then this video is for you. So make sure you watch it till the end. So first, let's discuss building a rapport on the viewing. Now, why is this so important? Well, the reason it's so important is because people do business with people that they like, know, and trust. So if a landlord or agent feels comfortable with you, they're more likely to become open to discussing a rent-to-rent deal. So how do you make them like you? How do you make them trust you? Well, you should be warm and friendly, smile, shake hands, and introduce yourself confidently. You should also be finding common ground. If you see something interesting in the property, for example, a book, sports team memorabilia, or a pet, mention it and start a casual conversation. Humans like to talk about casual things. They like to find common ground. And if you can have a conversation about something that has nothing to do with the property itself, then this can be a great way to start to build a relationship, a rapport with the landlord or agent. So start a casual conversation. Another tip would be to compliment the property. Say something positive about it, like, this is a great location, I bet tenants love living here. Compliments can go a long way, and you have to think about how a landlord thinks. They've probably invested a lot of their money into this asset, and they like to hear compliments about the asset rather than insults. So stroke their ego a little bit and make them feel good. You should also be using positive body language, positive open body language. So make eye contact, nod and smile when they're talking to you. Show that you're listening. People like to feel heard, and being able to listen to someone, actively listen, is such an underrated skill. You should be listening to what they're saying so that you can have a better conversation. Now, if you're meeting an agent at the property and they say something along the lines of, the landlord has had this property for 10 years, you can then reply, wow, that's amazing. They must have a lot of experience with renting it out. Or, I bet it's worth so much more than when they bought it. I'd love to own something like this one day. Now, moving on to step 2, you should ask questions about the property. Now, why is this important? Well, you need to gather as much information as possible to understand the deal and show that you're serious and knowledgeable. So first, you want to be finding out about the property details. So you should ask questions like, how many bedrooms and bathrooms does it have? When was it last refurbished? You also want to find out about the tenant history. So you should be saying things like, has the property been let to companies before? What kind of tenants have lived here previously? Find out about the condition and maintenance of the property. Ask questions like, are there any issues that need fixing? Or, is everything in good working order? Does the boiler work? Are all the windows working? You should also find out about the rent and terms. Say things like, what's the current rent? Are there any service charges or costs? If you're viewing an apartment or a flat, oftentimes there'll be an additional service charge that the landlord has to pay for upkeep and maintenance. They normally pay this to the freeholder every month. And if you were to take the property on, then you might become responsible for that cost. So it's a good question to ask. If the agent or landlord says something like, the last tenants left because they didn't like the area, you can say, that's good to know. I usually house professionals who work nearby, so they'd likely be a better fit. Next, we move on to finding the landlord or agent's motivation. Why is this important? Well, understanding why they're renting out the property in the first place helps you position rent-to-rent as the best solution for them. How you do this is you ask direct questions. Why is the landlord looking to rent this out now? Listen carefully for these common motivations. Common motivations include guaranteed rent. They want reliable payments with no hassle, which is great because that's exactly what you offer. Maybe they're tired of tenant issues. They've had bad experiences with tenants not paying or damaging the property. Maybe they've experienced void periods. They don't want the property sitting empty. This is another very common motivation for landlords. Hands-off management. They don't want to deal with maintenance or tenant problems themselves. They've been doing it for 20 or 30 years and they've had enough with dealing with maintenance or tenants directly themselves. So they're looking for someone to take these problems off of their hands. If you're there with an agent and the agent says, the landlord just wants a long-term tenant without the hassle, you can say, well, that's exactly what I offer. My company will take care of everything while the landlord receives guaranteed rent every month. Moving on to handling objections. Now, in rent-to-rent, you need to be able to handle objections, as you are going to get objections thrown at you quite often from agents and landlords, and you need to know what to say. This is probably the most important part of your rent-to-rent pitch. You have to know how to answer these objections correctly. Why is this important? Well, agents and landlords will have concerns. If you can handle objections confidently, you'll gain their trust immediately. So let's go over some of the common objections and how to overcome them. So the agent or landlord might say something along the lines of, "I've never heard of rent-to-rent before." You could then reply, "It's similar to a company let, where a business rents a property and provides it to their staff or clients. Most landlords and agents will be more familiar with a company let than a rent-to-rent pitch, as company lets have been around for years and years, a lot longer than rent-to-rent. So start there. The only difference is, with your company let, you wouldn't be renting to your own staff. You'd be renting to other companies' staff or clients. So contractors, working professionals, doctors, nurses that are working in the area, those are the people who would be living in the property. Your job as the rent-to-rent company would be to go and find these types of high-quality professional tenants, and then you would sit in the middle as the rent-to-rent operator. Another common objection is, what if you don't pay the rent? You would then respond to this by saying, "I sign a contract guaranteeing the rent, so even if the property is empty, the landlord will still get paid." Another common objection is, will there be any damage to the property? You would then respond, "I look after the property better than a standard tenant because I run a professional business. So it's in your best interest to keep the property in the best condition as possible so you can really attract those high quality premium tenants." Make sure you tell the landlord or agent this to gain some more trust. The landlord may then ask, "What's in it for me?" To which you could respond, "You get guaranteed rent, no tenant hassle, and a well-maintained property without paying a management fee or tenant fine fees." Quite often with typical estate agents, landlords have to pay a tenant fine fee either by the room or for the whole property if it's a single let, and this can sometimes be a whole month's rent. They also have to pay an ongoing management fee, which is normally somewhere between 10 to 12% of the monthly rental income, whereas with your service, there aren't any fees, and this is a huge pro of working with you rather than the typical high street letting agent. Now, if the landlord says, "I'm worried about my property being sublet," you can say, "I completely understand. That's why I only place professional tenants and I manage the property like it's my own." Again, you're removing the fear and reassuring the landlord that you're only going to put professional tenants, high quality professional tenants, into the property. You're not going to rush, you're not going to find bad tenants who are going to damage the property. You're only interested in working with high quality professional tenants. So make sure you say this to the landlord and strip away some of that fear. Now, moving on to step 5, how to close the deal. Now, unless you have a really warm conversation and the landlord is giving you signs that they want to work with you and they want to agree something there and then I would actually advise closing the deal either later on in the day or maybe even the following morning over email or on the phone. I wouldn't necessarily advise trying to close the deal face to face because people like to have a bit of time to think about things, and you don't want the landlord to feel like they're being rushed into something. You want them to have some time to consider your offer, maybe do some due diligence on you and work out if it's the right deal for them. But closing is still a very important part of this process. And if it's a good deal and a good property with a good landlord who's your ideal customer, then you have to close the deal and you have to move quite quickly. Why is this important? You need to move the conversation from a discussion to action so you don't lose the deal. Now, how do you do this? Well, you should summarize the benefits. So say something like, "So just to recap, you'll get guaranteed rent, full property management, and no voids. This means no stress for you." Highlight the perks of working with you. Now, as I said, if they're being really warm and it feels like they want to work with you, then you could assume the close. And you could say something along the lines of, "Shall we go ahead and get the paperwork sent over so you can have a read of the contract and terms and see if you feel comfortable with it?" You should also mention that if there's anything you don't feel comfortable with, then let us know and we can adjust the terms and go back and forth until you're happy. We want you to feel 100% comfortable in working with us before you commit. This will again remove any fear that they have that they're being rushed into a decision. And any good business deal needs to be a win-win for both parties involved. So make sure they feel comfortable. You should also give a next step. So you should say something along the lines of, "I can send over the agreement today and we can get everything signed as soon as you're ready." Again, this puts the ball in their court, but also it creates some urgency because the landlord is going to want the property to be rented as soon as possible. No landlord wants their property sitting empty for weeks and weeks. They want to find a good tenant. Your job is to show them that your company would be the best option for them over a long term. So you need to have some sort of urgency, but also don't make them feel rushed. Realistically, you should be agreeing terms over a 3 to 5 day period, and it's very normal to go back and forth and add things to the contract or subtract things from the contract until you're both happy. Then you sign the contract and you go ahead. Now, if the landlord's still kind of on the fence, then my final tip would be to create a bit more urgency. You could say something along the lines of, I have a few other properties that I'm looking at, but I'd love to get this one secured today. This just lets them know that you're looking at other properties too. I think it makes you sound more professional, and it does create some urgency, because if they like you and they like your offer, then the thought of you going to offer another landlord guaranteed rent rather than them might make them feel like they're missing out on your very valuable service. So you could create some urgency if you feel like they're still on the fence and they're not quite sure. So that's my 5-step framework for closing a rent-to-rent deal. Just to summarize, we've covered step 1, building a rapport on a viewing. Step 2, asking questions about the property. Step 3, find the landlord or agent's motivation. Step 4, handle objections. And step 5, close the deal. I hope you found value in this video, guys. And as always, I'll see you on the next one.